Hey everybody, it's Leslie, and you're listening to Duologue with Leslie Heaney. My guest today is one of the most celebrated interior designers in the world, Nina Campbell. From her redesign of London's legendary Annabelles as a young woman to a design portfolio that includes grand estates, castle restorations, projects for high-profile A-listers and royals, her illustrious career spans over 60 years. I was so honored to get the opportunity to sit down with this talented legend, who also happens to be one of the most delightful people that I've ever had the privilege to spend time with. We met a few months ago in Antigua, and then I had the privilege again of speaking with Nina for the podcast. And in this episode, we cover everything from how she got started as a young woman working for the renowned John Fowler of Colefax and Fowler, to some of her favorite projects, including the subject of her most recent book called A House in Maine. Nina talks about some of her more challenging projects, particularly one in China. She's an incredible storyteller, and she shares not only her experience and tips about what makes a home special, but we also get inside scoop on her favorite paint colors and tabletop and where to find antiques. And I guess all I'll say is this is an episode of Duologue that you do not want to miss. So with that, here is the great Nina Campbell. For listeners, Nina and I met in Antigua a few months ago. And as I said to my husband, I'm so excited to get to talk to Nina this morning. I have this crush on this wonderful woman in person. And anyway, so I'm just so delighted that you were taking the time to chat with us on the podcast.
But we had such a good time in Antigua that we have to repeat it.
Exactly. So let's talk about your extraordinary career, 50 years in interior design. I always like hearing sort of how did someone get started? And I think you started at 19, right? Working for the great John Fowler of Colefax and Fowler. Is that right?
That is right. I was very lucky, actually. In fact, I'm afraid it is now, because we've been talking about it for such a long time, it's now 60 years in design, I think. But anyway, no, I was incredibly lucky. The awful thing was I didn't really know much about it. I mean, I didn't know anything about interior design, except I'd done the Michael Inchbald course. And my stepfather knew somebody. It was rather like that thing, I danced with the man who danced with the girl who danced with the Prince of Wales. It was sort of like somewhere along the line, somebody knew John Fowler, and I was sent for an interview. And I can only imagine he was as puzzled as I was about why I was there, because he employed me immediately, which was very lucky. And I had the most wonderful he was a very, very special person. And I worked for his sort of second in command, or probably first in command, called Imogen Taylor. I sat at her sort of desk and was summoned occasionally by John Fowler. And he was a really terrific teacher. And he was rather I think he thought I was rather funny. I still don't know why he picked me against anybody else, because he asked me if I could take down a letter. And I had done, typing in shorthand or whatever it was called. But luckily, he'd never dictated to anybody. So it took me about a day to get the letter back, because between us, we couldn't understand what anybody was talking about. But it was after that, I sort of became an assistant to him. And I carried on, I carried the bags and went wherever he went and listened to him talk about things. And, we went to the Italian embassy one time to redo the big salon there. And I remember he said, "Come along, darling, let's sit on this sofa and play ladies." So we sat down with a cup of wonderful Italian coffee, which was brought to us. And then he explained about the tapestries and explained how at that moment they were sitting on dull cream walls, but that if he took a tapestry blue colour, which he would mix specially, and put it behind, the tapestries would really come to life, which was absolutely true. And they looked amazing. And, it was sort of, so you learnt somehow about what to pull out of a colour, of a palette, and what not. And just subliminally, you couldn't help but learn from him. He was very generous with his infinite knowledge.
I think I'd read you're 19 when you started working with him. And so you're a very young woman. And as you said, you're just sitting there sort of absorbing all of this information from one of the all-time greats. And then when did you start? So from there, did you know, was it just watching his passion for his work that sort of led you to think, gosh, this is something I want to do with my life, or this, I love doing this? What was it about it that you found so compelling?
Well, I suppose it was that fact that, I mean, if you're suddenly in a room and there is a tapestry on a wall and it looks rather dull, and then suddenly this man says to you, well, if you just pick a color out of it and mix it, put a little bit of raw umber and black and this and that, and suddenly the whole room looks, it is life changing, really. And we'd moved house a lot. As a child, I was constantly being asked by mother, choosing my own wallpaper. So I wasn't it wasn't unknown to me to move around and, pick out samples and do that. So I'd been brought up in that sort of background in a way to a certain extent. And then while I was working for John Fowler, then suddenly I did get asked to do things.
He would send you out on projects? Yeah.
Yes. So I was, my family had a great friend who had a wonderful house and a terrific collection. And they, in fact, asked me if I would like to go and do something. And I obviously passed it by John Fowler, and he said, yes, do go off and do it. So I suppose he must have sort of, for some extraordinary reason, had some sort of belief in me. And then Mark Birley had come to me and asked me to do some work for him at Annabelle's. And John Fowler said, look, please do that. You do that, because he didn't want to do it.
But tell me about that, because I read about this story. So you're at Annabelle's, right? And you're meeting with Mark Birley, and you're,
Well, I wasn't actually, funny enough, I was in my brother's house. My brother was a friend of his, and I didn't know who he was, but Annabelle was all the rage at that moment. And I was introduced to him, and somebody said, he owns Annabelle's. And I said, oh, I love going to Annabelle's. And we were chatting. And I said, actually, the only thing is, I do think that the vitrines either side of the bar are a bit tacky. When you're 19 years old and you meet God, you don't realize that he's very important. And everyone was sort of, I think the room probably gasped at the thought that I was actually telling Mark Birley that something I didn't like. So I said I thought the vitrines were rather cheap looking, because they were lined in some sort of white vinyl or something and selling jewelry. And I said, it looks a bit like a hotel. Those vitrines in the Ritz,
right?
That little, selling bits of jewelry. And he said, well, if you think you're so clever, do them yourself. And I sort of thought this was, perfectly fine. And so I said, I'll come and see you in a couple of days. So I rolled up with whatever I thought was appropriate, which was some wonderful Chinese red silk. And I did a little border in blue and red. And I suggested some Chinese porcelain in blues and reds. And so he liked it and said, yes, let's go ahead. And actually they were there, I think, till Annabelle's, was demolished.
Was it the bar area?
It was the big bar with that wonderful sort of thing. And then either side were these vitrines, which just sat there, glass-fronted cases, with this Chinese porcelain and on this Chinese red background. And actually the fact that probably people didn't notice, I think, is much better than people noticing the tacky jewelry. So, there is an advantage to doing something which is chic and stylish, because it doesn't shout at you.
Right. One of your signature approaches, right, is to have it not shout out at you and just seem as if it's just been there and is just so classic in the way that things look, that it's not.
I think it's more relaxing, don't you?
Yes. No, absolutely. And then you from that experience though, didn't you and Mark Birley then open a shop together later? Is that right?
Yes, we did, because then I went off and became an interior designer on my own for quite a few years, I suppose. And I was always doing Annabelle's, and then I did Mark's Club, which was the next club he bought. And I was always doing the Annabelle's work. And then I then decided that I'd sort of had enough of interior design for other people, because, I suppose I thought people were difficult, which they are sometimes. And I just thought, what, I really don't want to do this anymore. I want to have a shop, which had always been my passion as a child. I'd wanted a shop. So he said he quite liked a shop too, and we'd sell all sorts of things that you couldn't really buy in London at the time. And one of the things we wanted to sell was the Porto linens, from Madame Porto in Paris. And so we went off there. And then we went to Fauchon, also in Paris, and they had lovely jars of sweets, and they had little sort of wooden racks with three different mustards in. I mean, ideal weekend gifts, that you could take that and everything else. That was actually to a certain extent a success, except the customs officers decided to open all the sweets when they came and eat them to see if they were, well, I suppose just to pretend that if they had drugs or something. Of course, they had all these delicious chocolates. So,
right, exactly. It's sort of when TSA takes that
yes, exactly.
sunscreen that costs, and you're, please, it's only 4 ounces, just let it pass. So when you were at that time, you mentioned Porto and bringing those linens in. Were those stores are we talking early 1970s now? And are those?
Yeah, yes, we're talking because I married in 70, so it was late 60s.
Okay.
The big sheets and all that were being sold at the White House, which was the linen shop on Bond Street. But the tea sets and the trays, and we really were a gift. We were for expensive presents, I suppose. So, the idea was that you had, in those days, somebody would bring you breakfast in bed, and this exquisite Porto china and the linens it was called a tete-a-tete, yes, which was the tray cloth and 2 little napkins, and they were all scalloped. I mean, they were ravishing, actually. And I had an American sister-in-law, and she used to think her day wasn't done at all unless she'd been to Porto on 57th Street and bought a little hand towel. Everything was just fabulous. As it still is. Actually.
No, it is. It still is. So is this at this point? There was I think you did a big project at a great house in Scotland. Am I right about that?
You're absolutely right. I had a great friend who owned this extraordinary house called Cullen House in Scotland, and I mean it had sort of 18 bedrooms, and it was absolutely wonderful actually. And I was a friend there, and they had got dry rot, which I think it's a particularly English thing, dry rot. I didn't quite, it's something to do with damp. Anyway, the whole bedroom, which was huge, had to be completely taken to pieces. And actually, I'd never seen dry rot. I'd heard about it, and they took the wall down, and it was really horrible. I think the only way to describe it is like a cancer of the building. Okay. It was a sort of terrible spreading thing. And when you saw it, I mean, it was horrifying. Anyway, it was all dealt with and taken out and put back, and so I redid their bedroom, and then I embarked on the entire house, and that was really great fun to do because there were so many bedrooms that you could do them all differently, and I stayed there as a friend as well, so it was rather fun. I got to sleep in all the rooms I was doing, so I really knew whether they were comfortable or not, and what was missing, and if we needed an extra tray or Kleenex box or whatever it was.
I love that. You told a story when you and I were talking a few months ago about another client of yours and spending the night at their house and then discovering that the mattress wasn't what these aren't the mattresses we ordered, but I love that that personal approach, where you're really kind of trying to dive into what it feels like to be a guest in a home or to live in the home and have that be kind of part of your guide and how you're helping to.
That was quite a shock. We both arrived at breakfast having not slept a wink, sort of, oh God, that was quite.
Well, it's good that you're taking it for a test run. Now, how long for a house like that in Scotland? How long does that kind of project take? Was that?
I suppose it took probably about 3 years, and then subsequent to that, they then moved out of that house. I mean, a few years later, and moved into what was called the Dower House, which also has sort of 8 bedrooms, which I did up. And then I went back to stay there the other day. And we were doing a little refreshing in certain places, because if you live somewhere, you sometimes don't notice that things go a bit awry.
Did you go back? Was there any things that you dry rot, or you're like, I think we need
to... No, there was no dry rot, but there was... I think things just need sometimes refreshing. And I mean, I went up there to do a couple of things, which were... It was funny because my client and great friend said, oh, God, we're getting to the point where we can't see what we're eating, so we need more light in the dining room. So we went up to figure out how on earth to do that. And that involves, taking the carpet up in the room above and coming through and dealing with the lighting. And so that's, of course, that sparks a whole nother situation. And maybe the paintwork's looking a bit this and that and something else. But I mean, it, in that from sort of, I don't know, late 1960s to 2025, it's not bad if you've done it 3 times. It's actually quite economical.
Absolutely. But also, I think what happens is, or at least in my own experience, once you've you fix something in a room or you refresh a room and that room looks so terrific, you sort of look around and think, should we have that, does that other room need to? And so kind of it snowballs from there. But at some point in you're doing these incredible projects. And then in the I think it was the early 1990s, you decided to start your own line of fabric and wallpaper, which was distributed through Osborne and Little. What was the impetus for that? There were older fabrics you found that weren't being produced anymore. Was it that you felt like there was certain fabrics design that you wanted to see more of, or what was your thinking in wanting to?
Well, before I went with Osborne and Little, I had started my own. I mean, I had started, printing my own fabrics, and probably sensible people, if something was discontinued, would think, well, obviously nobody likes it. I thought, how annoying that this is discontinued. And I asked the owner of one of the fabrics, who was actually a good friend of mine, I said, look, I need this for a client, and would you mind if I love it so much, would you mind if I use it for my collection, if you really are, if you've really got rid of it? And he allowed me to do that. And that was the beginning of, actually, it's the little sprig pattern.
Oh, yes.
That we do all our wash bags, and I was lining out a room in it and whatever else. And so that was the beginning of my collection. Then I went on doing that, and somebody came to me with something I thought was really pretty, and we printed that. And it was very difficult in those days, because today, if you want to start a fabric collection, you do everything digitally, which means you can print 10 meters or 30 meters or whatever. Then you had to commit to certainly 150 if the man was sort of lenient and sort of quite liked you. But so, it was much more of a commitment.
Yes.
And so we were doing quite a lot of textiles by this time, and I'd already been to a show, and people were coming up to me and saying, we'd like to represent you in Spain. And I thought, oh, God, what is all this? It's a nightmare. And there is a moment when success could kill you, because you just don't know what on earth you're doing. And at that moment, somebody came to me and said, would you like me to help you do this side of the business? He'd left Colefax and Fowler, and he knew exactly what he was doing. And so he did help me for a bit. And eventually Osborne and Little came, liked what we were doing, and said, listen, we would like to represent you on a licensing arrangement, which was actually, fantastic. Anthony Little of Osborne and Little was such a legendary character. He's got a big sale actually next quite soon at Druids, but of all his collecting. But he was such fun to work with because he was an extraordinary talent, and I learned a lot from him. And he very generously loved my use of colour, and was very complimentary about that to me, which was always nice to be complimented by somebody you admire. Yeah,
was that so? Were you sort of collaborating with them? Were they offering feedback on certain fabrics that you were? Was it sort of a partnership, or they were distributing or licensing it, from you, in their showrooms?
They were licensing it, and obviously it went through all their showrooms, which meant that it went through America and Europe and everywhere else.
Right.
Which was extraordinary. And they bought it, obviously, and stocked it and did the cuttings and did all that. And I did the designing. I then employed an artist because I know what I want, but I'm not, I hadn't studied textile design. And so I worked with them. But then, of course, Anthony was hugely helpful. But it was really, the idea was we would give them what we wanted. And they obviously had the right to say, yuck, we think this is it. But luckily they didn't, so that was all right.
I don't know if you were telling me this, or maybe I read this, that you might be in an old, beautiful home and see this incredible wallpaper, or yes, that had.
I did probably my most successful wallpaper was something called Brawlin, and I was in Scotland, and I was up the Glen, the Birley Glen. And there was this little house which was on the estate but had been sold off to somebody else. And we peered through the windows like nosy Parkers to see what was going on. And there was this wallpaper who had rolled off the wall because the wall was rather damp. And I said, let's go in and see what it was. And it was this wonderful paper. And it was a sort of tree of life. And I said it didn't sort of belong to anybody because the house was completely, decrepit. So I took it back and I said, look, may I put that in my collection? It's just rolled off the wall. And so I said, I will give you, when we print it, I'll give you enough to do a room in the castle, which was they were living in. And so that's how that started. And that became, I did it in 4 colors. We redid all the colorings. And that became a textile and then a wallpaper. And it became really a huge seller for us, the broad-in. It was wonderful.
Love that. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, and I know you don't kiss and tell and you're not going to tell us which clients, but I'd love to get some, just hear from you about some of the projects that you've done, sort of your favorites, your most challenging or your most special in the 60 years that you have been in interior design. Is there one project that you are most proud of or that you thought was sort of most special or unique?
Well, I suppose in a way the most far-flung and possibly interesting in many ways was a project I did in China. I worked for the owner in England because he'd wanted an English house for his English friends. He was originally a mainland Chinese who'd gone over to Hong Kong when, he'd been sent over as a young man when the revolution came in China. And his father had gone into the government under Deng Xiaoping to help sort it out. But he'd been educated at Cambridge. So he was a most extraordinary man who I did meet as a very old man. But his son had gone to Hong Kong and had built a huge business and then had a lot of English friends because Hong Kong was, Anglo-Chinese really. And so he wanted this house. And the funny thing was, given that he was the son of the vice president of communist China, he bought the house that had belonged to a British prime minister. And so I remember saying to one of the local policemen one day, you used to be looking for Reds under the beds because we were very worried about the communists at that moment. And now you've got Reds in the beds. So this is
Reds under the beds or in the beds is very funny. I mean,
so anyway, but he was the most wonderful man. And he used to, so I did the house in England. And then he rang up. He had quite a heavy Chinese accent, despite speaking impeccable English. And he rang up and he said, "Hello, Nina." They said who he was. Well, it wasn't very difficult to figure out who he was. He said, "Are you busy?" And I sort of said, "Oh, no, of course I'm not busy. I'm just sitting here at my desk. Can you come to China next weekend or something?" So actually, "Can you come to China tomorrow?" I think he said. And I said, "Well, I really can't come tomorrow, but I'll come next week." And I went to China. I went to Shanghai, and then I drove, which was terrifying, to where he lived, had this house. And we did this house in China, which was really quite complicated because I had, in those days, there was not much. I'd already done a house for him in Hong Kong, so I knew his taste, and he was a wonderful collector. And so we went to China, and I had to take everybody from England. He wanted the house to look quite English. He wanted fireplaces and things. Well, one day, I'd bought the fireplaces from Jam here, and I'd sent them out there, beautiful fireplaces. And the architect rang me up and said, I'm trying to figure out how to get the fireplace onto the wall, and where do I drill it? So I nearly had a heart attack. I said, "You can't drill a hole in the fireplace." Oh, he said, "But there's no way of screwing it onto the wall," which the whole conversation was getting, I was nearly fainting with the horror of the whole thing. So I said, "Look, I'll come next week and I'll show you exactly how to fit the fireplace. You have to put it on with plaster or whatever." So I took a fireplace person from England to fit the fireplace. So there were some quite funny moments.
So you land, mainland China, you land in Beijing or Shanghai, and then you drive.
Shanghai, we drive, yes, for about 3 hours. And that's quite perilous, I have to say, because
are you in the mountains? Give us no,
it's quite, the road was sort of quite flat. The place was called Wuxi.
Okay.
And it had nobody had heard of it except had 9 million people living in it. And it had a Cartier in the town. Sort of like, there are all these random things, but if you went into a store, you couldn't find a tomato.
Right.
It was very weird. And because it was quite early, it was sort of before handover, I think. But anyway, we did it. And it was just great fun to do because I did everything. I did all the sheets and the towels and the specialist painting. We sent our painters over. Our painters taught the Chinese painters how to paint. One of the things which was a bit of a problem was that I ordered the paint, and apparently this big well-known paint company had outlet in China. So we bought the paint and I thought, that's wonderful. And I went into this room and I thought, the paint looks really odd. So I put my fingernail on the wall and I scraped it. The paint came off. I thought, how can that happen? Well, it turned out that the painter, the local painter, had decided that the paint would go further if they watered it down. So they'd watered down this paint and put it on the wall. Well, of course, it didn't stick to the wall; it just fell off. So I asked the client. I said, "Look, I'm sorry. I always coming to you with quite expensive ideas, but could we buy the paint in Hong Kong, bring it out, and then my people will put it on, or we'll teach your people to put it on properly," which we did. Luckily, I mean, he was the most wonderful client, and
And so you brought the whole crew. You were just bringing every.
Yeah, we were about some moments there were 30 of us there. We even brought our own tea because, strangely, English people like tea, which no Chinese person would ever dare drink. And so, talk about taking your own tea to China. It was really absurd. But anyway, we stayed there for months on end and went back. We sort of had a rotation of, going back and forth.
And was that so sort of those like, the paint falling off when you scratched it or somebody wanting to drill into a fireplace where smoke would come out? Was that one of your projects that had kind of, the most sort of unexpected issue or significant issue? Or did you ever have projects that you had to move a huge piece of furniture and it didn't fit through the door, or you?
Every designer, I think, has always had a piece of furniture that arrives at the door and it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
You have to take the legs off the sofa to get it upstairs or something. And it hopefully only happens to you once. And once it's happened to you, you say to everybody that comes and works for you, have you measured how you're going to get a piece of furniture upstairs? Because it just, it's one of those things. But I think the job in China was possibly the most challenging because actually, the people were lovely and they were so keen to learn, but it was so beyond their,
right,
what they'd ever done before. So you were really sort of teaching. They were very cheerful, and the conditions that they lived in. They were sleeping in tents.
Yeah.
I remember actually nearly having a heart attack one day because I'd sent out a very expensive carpet and one of the painters decided it looked rather more comfortable than sleeping on the floor. And he'd unrolled it and was sleeping on a corner of this sort of Savonnerie carpet. And I just thought, I don't want to sound sort of unkind, but, this can't happen because anybody, he might drop his soup or his coffee or something on it. But anyway, there was always a way of getting around things,
What about a project that you're sort of most proud of, meaning you just loved how it turned out? It just resonates with you personally. You love, one of the pictures that you showed me was that house.
I think you're going to say the house in Maine, and the one the book's about.
Yes.
And I think that was really a wonderful project because, again, I got to know the family incredibly well and the children of the family and the dogs of the family, obviously, like the one that's snapping at your heels at the moment. And now the children have had babies and, and that's really lovely. And I go and stay there, quite a lot, which is fun because I see because houses settle, they book and families move in and, they go on, which is exciting, and now that the client rings me up and says, look, I've seen this, where I'd love to have this in my house, where can we fit it? So there's always an ongoing conversation. And I love that. And I think I just really enjoyed doing that house because she enjoyed it as well, And so, and there was no problem. If she didn't like something, she said she didn't like it. If I didn't like something, I said, I'm not sure about this. So, it was a very good relationship and true friends, true friendship has come out of it.
Oh, that's lovely.
And I love the house. I think, it's sort of something I think. And when I go and stay, I sleep in different bedrooms and,
Well, you have to just to make, the mattresses, you're checking the sheets, you're just test driving all the areas. But this is the house, right? And because I know I've seen so many terrific pictures of different projects. Is this the one that had the bar in it where they recreated Annabelle's, or was that the other house in Maine that we
Yes, no, that's exactly that lavender lacquer room where
Yes.
you go through the telephone box to get to it.
Yeah. Can we, this
Yeah.
is a very, I mean, talk about, I love all of just the part about, you having this great relationship with them and kind of having your vision sort of being aligned and creating this incredible, incredible home. But what I loved about that house so much is you had these just beautiful rooms. And then you also had this totally playful sort of, I love a good after party, Nina. And there's a whole, they really,
and as I go there a lot, it's really a party house.
yeah.
And actually I was employed first to just do that because the client's husband had got this idea that he wanted, rather like, he'd always been watching Doctor Who, and he wanted to go through a telephone box, old-fashioned telephone box, and arrive in a nightclub very unexpectedly. And so that's what we talked about. And I said, well, you do realize that all those telephone boxes in London have been disconnected because, people now don't use them. And now when you walk into them, there are little cards stuck to the wall that have been left by certain ladies who would like to be found for business adventures.
So I would thought you would tell me there's some sort of like, a London phone booth or a phone booth, graveyard somewhere. Is where you?
Well, obviously they're architects. We worked with Ferguson Shamamian on this house, and somebody found the telephone box graveyard, and we got one and had it all the red paint burnt off, and then the lavender paint put on, and but it's still got that black telephone which you have to pick up and say dial 007, and the black door comes out, and so that is great fun, and I think it's enormous fun working for somebody that's got a sort of sense of humor and sense of playfulness, because then we get into that room, which I think we saw when we spoke last, and then there's a bowling alley. So actually, and there's a wonderful bar, and so it's because the architects were so good. There's a support kitchen behind the bar. It was just a joy working with Ferguson Shamamian, quite frankly, as well.
Oh, that's so
that makes a huge difference. And the builder was wonderful. We had a terrific team, and I think it shows at the end.
Oh, it's so, and that is, just for people listening, the title of the book. Remind me, Nina, the title of the book. It's a house in, it's called a house in Maine. Yes. House in Maine. And this house is absolutely, it's extraordinary. And it sort of opened my mind, as someone who, had a disco ball once in a smoke machine and my karaoke machine. This whole just took me to another level of sort of imagining the possibilities.
I'll come and recreate it for you in Nashville. Yeah. You can go line dancing.
I know. What were you talking about earlier? The
mandrels?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The mandrels line dancing. So would you say that is it? What is your favorite thing about being an interior designer? Is it collaborating with a client or realizing their vision and your vision, or taking spaces that you see so much promise in and making that into a reality? What is there a favorite thing for you about the process or the work?
I think the most joyful is when your client really understands, and it becomes a dual. You do it together because they are in tune with you, and you get yourself in tune with them, and they listen to what you want. I think it's always, which happened actually, fun enough, in both houses in Maine that I did, and really on most projects that I've done. And people are different, and that's what I like about it. I was in New York the other day because I'm doing a house in Telluride for somebody that I've worked for in New York. I've worked for in Del Rey in California, and I've worked for them also. I've done a hotel for them also in Telluride, and I know them very well now, and I know their taste, and it's quite fun to go into a world that's slightly different to what it's completely different to what I was doing in Maine, but it gives you access to different things and trying different things. And, when you know somebody that well, you sort of know what they're going to warm to and what they're not going to warm to. And so I find that rather exciting. And, if somebody says, I remember doing something once, and somebody who thought that I'd never met before, said, oh, well, I know Nina Campbell's work, and this isn't very Nina Campbell. And I said, well, actually, I was standing there, and I said, well, actually, I am Nina Campbell, and I did it. So it is my work. Because people are different, I don't like that it's my way or the highway sort of approach. It's what is your passion? And now let's go with it and let's embrace it and see what we can do.
Well, that's one of the things I think is so extraordinary about your work, because there are many designers who, will create beautiful spaces, but you can really tell that room was designed by that particular designer. And I feel like the spaces that you design and the houses that you design, depending on where they are geographically, and as you said, sort of, when you get to know the client, kind of figuring out what they like and don't like, it's not like, there is a signature, for lack of a better description, like signature style, meaning you can see it's so well appointed and it's beautiful, but I don't see, sometimes you'll see a designer using the same fabric multiple times in different, I see every project that you do is so unique.
I'd like my signature really to be detail, because I think that what is important is the detail of how you do something, so that the piping on the chair and the thing on the cross on the bottom, or maybe you do something differently, so that I think it needs to be well made. I think you can buy things that are affordable. I'm not talking about that. It doesn't all have to be really expensive, but it has to be well done. I think when it's badly done, it's rather irritating.
Yeah.
And also it won't last. And I think you go into, the clients I'm working in Telluride, I went to see them in New York, and I did the house once a long time ago, just probably in the 80s. And then I've done the house again because they, it was they want to go a bit more contemporary. And so we did it again, and they said, would you like to do it? And I said, actually, I'd love to do something more contemporary. And so we did that. And I went back there, and it's probably 10 years old by now. And it's just looking really good still. And I think that's important, that when you do things well, they last.
We were talking about that, I think it's Cullen House in Scotland, or the other house where they're just, it's been, I don't know, 40, 50 years since you initially did it, and you've done it twice since then. So, it's just, maybe you're just replacing the fabric because the chair is worn, but it sounds like doing something in such a classic way that fits so well with that particular space, location, client, that it just has real longevity. And
in the Scottish project, we took quite a lot of the stuff out of the big castle and put it in some of the bedrooms and some of the rooms, actually, and then just adjusted them so that, they looked right in their new surroundings. And some of them are actually from the original, well, some of them probably about 50 years old, because I just had my first child, Rita, when I started on this thing. And, she's that sort of age now. So the fabrics have still survived. And maybe the wall paint has got a bit discolored or something like that, or one freshens up something. Lampshades, I've always said that lampshades and cushions are the sort of shoes and handbag of the interior design world. And you need to refresh them, really. And you can keep that perfect black dress that you've had forever. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, So if you have the sofa's so well made and it's a beautiful sofa, the fabric, just adding the pillows can be a refresh, or swapping out the lampshade. Do you feel like has your approach or philosophy changed at all over these decades? Have your clients' wants changed?
Well, yes, I think that has it. Well, first of all, I suppose when I started, I sound as if I'm 100 now if I say that people didn't eat in the kitchen.
I knew I started with 50, and then when you said 60, so I don't want to. You look like you've only been doing it for 10 years, Nina. So if that's any consolation,
People used to have dining rooms which they used all the time, and now people have eat-in kitchens which have become more and more fancy. And one of the things I enjoyed actually enjoy going to and enjoy about the house in Maine is that they have a wonderful staff who get very excited because they only go certain times of the year. So you eat everywhere. You suddenly, the greenhouse gets set up for a dinner, and it's suddenly so wonderfully done. And there's a sort of, Vietnamese dinner takes place in the greenhouse one night. And then, So I think that's fun. That's quite an extravagant thing to do. But I think you don't need to eat only in the dining room, because I think that dining room there gets extremely overused, and it's never glamorous, because what's nice about a dining room is candles and nighttime and long dinner and people getting to sort of dressed up somehow and thinking they're going to have a really glamorous evening and then wonderful conversation. So you don't really want to have lunch in that room, and then, because it takes fun out of it. So if you can eat in different places, I think that's a terrific thing to have in the back of your mind when you design a house.
That is so true and so interesting. And I guess for that, I think I do recall some photographs of them doing something in the greenhouse, or maybe they do something.
There was a tent. They've actually got a tent which goes up and becomes a Moroccan evening, and and I mean that's fantastic.
But that probably, if you are creative about it, it's not that hard to do.
No.
You're not going to have the gorgeous greenhouse or the gorgeous tent with their view necessarily, or their, everything else. But you can get, as you said, sort of thinking about how you can create spaces for different experiences, where you're having friends for dinner, or maybe we do it in a different place and we, get a great tablecloth and get a rental table, whatever, just sort of opening up the possibilities of.
There was a famous article in a magazine once, and actually it was somebody I knew, and she had turned her, I have to say that this was in Paris, and she had a sort of banquette made that would slip over the bath so she could use her bathroom, which was incredibly. I didn't have the loo in it, that was in another room, but the bath was suddenly turned into a banquette and a trestle table came in. And I thought that was such a funny idea. It was just sort of so insane, but why not,
Was this in New York City? That I feel like I saw in a book, and I forget whose.
It was either New York or in Paris. I have a feeling, but it was quite a long time ago, and I remember thinking, wow, if you can get away with that. If you live in an apartment with a huge bathroom, I mean, why not?
I love that. And what about, you sort of hear of designers when people are, go to school and are professionally educated in interior design, they'll say, well, there's certain rules, design rules. Are there rules and I don't know what those rules are because I'm not an interior designer in any way, but are there rules that you love to break? I don't know if the rules have to do with.
I like to break all rules, and I never went to school. So actually, I did go to school, and then Mr. Fowler said, please forget everything you learned there. So that was a great success, because I'd been going to parties every night, so I hadn't actually learned much. But I think you need to use your brain and your eyes and your ears, because you want to listen to the client and what they want. You have to observe how they want to live in that house, or how they don't live, and are there children, are there not children, are the dogs sit on the sofa, do they, how do they hang their clothes? You need to ask a lot of questions and become quite involved, I think. And then you also have to sort of, I always try and say to my girls, this person may have a certain amount of money, but if you tell them it's going to cost X and you exceed that amount, that is just as difficult for them to find that amount, even if we're talking huge sums, as it is for you. If you want to spend £1,000 and suddenly somebody told you it was 1,300, where are you going to find that? You've got to think, you've got to stick by your budget, because I think that's really the only fair thing to do. I mean, you can say, look, if you want that done, right, we either cut something else or we extend the budget. But I think you've got to be very upfront about all of that side of the business. You can't suddenly say, oh, at the end, and wonder why they're upset. So I think you've got to keep that very much at the forefront. It's a lot of business in a way, and a lot of designing, but in a way the business side is important, because everyone has to know where they stand financially on everything, I think, and time-wise.
I was just going to say, I think that is such an important point that you brought up, and also just managing people's expectations around when things.
I mean, we did have that when I was doing the house in Maine, because it's in Maine, and it was quite early on in the project, but there was a brutal winter, and the builders, I mean, they couldn't even put a spade in the ground. It was so hard. And what they did was that they bought a property with a huge, like a hangar, and they did all the woodwork in advance, so that they didn't waste time, and that the wood could get acclimatized and whatever else, because you couldn't dig a hole in the ground. But I mean, that's relatively extreme.
But that's actually just, also though a reflection of just the wonderful people that they had working on the project from
first. Yeah, absolutely. And also, it was early days, so it became obvious that, the thing would take that really a year longer, which it did.
What about for you when you're designing a room? Are there must-haves for you? I guess it depends on what room you're designing, but
I just remember that first, Mr. Fowler taking me to the embassy and saying, "Dear child, let's play ladies. Now, where are you going to put in those days, your drink and your cigarette? You're sitting on the sofa. You've got to have a place to put your drink down. Now you're not allowed a cigarette, so you can put your drink down on it. But, you need that. There's no point. Can you imagine going somewhere and sitting there and holding your wretched drink for the entire, because there's nowhere to put it. That's annoying. And I remember I did a book. The first book I ever did was on Elsie de Wolfe. I got intrigued by her. And she said, never have a chair alone in a room, because the shy person will arrive first anyway, and we'll sit in this wretched chair and we'll be too shy to get out of it, and nobody will come and talk to us. And I thought, no, that sounds like me. I'd probably arrive on time and be stuck in this wretched chair. So I think that's when you're designing a room, you never want, unless it's somebody who says, I want a chair in my room by myself so I can read my newspaper, and I don't want anyone to come anywhere near me, which also happens. So I think that's why you have to ask a lot of questions.
That is a really good point, though, when you're having, and this, I'm sure we've both had this experience. You've gone to someone's home for a cocktail party or for a dinner party, and the seating is arranged in such a way in the living room that somebody's sort of exiled over here. It's not
marooned over there.
And they, and then you have to move around or try to make sure everyone feels like they're included. And that can be a tough hill to climb. What about, are there any projects, things that you haven't designed yet, whether it could be like a boat or a plane? I don't know. I feel like you've done it all. You're
done a boat. And actually I did do this boat. A lot of us were asked to do a boat called The World. We all did our designs for The World, having not been on it. And then the owners said, and especially there was one guy who'd done them his wonderful room with a terrific chandelier in the middle of the room. And the chandelier was probably about 3 foot. Well, the ceiling height, which none of us expected, was about 7'6". So the chandelier would have been sort of practically hanging on the floor. So that was quite funny. We all had a bit of a laugh about that. But that was quite an extraordinary thing to get involved with. And I have done a yacht for a client, actually, who I'd worked for before. It's quite complicated, actually, because everything has to not wobble. You have to have drawers under everything. Every cup and spoon and glass has to have a place to fit in. But I think doing those things that are taking you a bit out of your comfort zone as a designer are rather fun, because you're learning all the time. And I think that's, at the moment, we're doing these rather special care homes. And, again, you want it to look like your own home, but it's got to be practical. It's got to allow for wheelchairs. You've got to have, vanity things in the bathroom that somebody could get under comfortably if they were in a wheelchair still. And it's it tests your brain, which I think that's quite fun.
Yeah, those projects. So you were working on some senior living projects in the UK, which, I'm 52. I don't know when I'm eligible, maybe 50. I don't know. The US, you're eligible at 55 at some of these places. I guess what I'm getting.
I'm very eligible, now. But I'm still clinging on. So
but it sounds it's such a terrific concept, right? Of living in these beautiful spaces, but that are designed by you, but having them be practical for people that maybe are not walking so well. Or I remember you were chatting with me about sort of the fabrics that you're choosing and making sure that it's wheelchair accessible, all of those things. And then you also have a new line out, right? It's Nina Campbell.
Oh, Nina for Next.
Yes.
Nina Campbell for Next. Yes, that's rather fun. I've just done an apartment for a client of mine I started working for when the children were little, and so we did all their bedrooms when they were the two boys and were soldiers, and all their special collections of things, and the girls. One girl was absolutely crazy about butterflies and wanted everything lavender, and so now all 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, have grown up. They've all got married in 1 year, and that they've all had children. So there's now 4 grandchildren. And that's rather fun because I'm doing 7 nurseries, taking the baby furniture that was bought from Dragons 30 years ago, and it's all been redone by the Dragons people. And so each child has got their set of baby furniture for their children, which is rather lovely. So we've reimagined all of that. And then, but what we have done, one of them is living in London, doing a PhD or something. And so there's an apartment which is rented, but which I've done for them. And so I sort of used part of my next collection because, it was affordable and part of mine and whatever else. And it was rather fun using it myself for somebody I'm incredibly fond of. So it really mattered to me. And then putting it in with my own furniture, because I think that's what we should be doing, and what I feel very strongly about is creating a line of furniture, all of which I would want to use and have at home myself. If I'm not sure of something in my shop, I probably take 6 and have a panic attack in the middle of the night thinking, will anyone ever buy it? And when they said something once to me, they said, well, we're not sure, with this maybe a bit ahead for us. So I don't know what they said. I think we're only going to order 500 or something. I nearly fainted. I thought, God, if that's your idea of not ordering very much. So obviously they order and they can control the prices because they are a big player.
It's great. That's really,
and also they're great fun to work with because I love working with all these young, brilliant people who have these departments, and you can almost say anything, and they say, "Oh yes, we can do that." And it's just like going into a sweet shop.
How fun and how rewarding, and I love, for so many of your clients, you having these long relationships with them and watching their lives, evolve and change and grow, over the course of your relationship with them. Anything you haven't done that you want to do, like you want to do a project it could be in a certain country. It could be, I think I asked you about a year. It could be anything you feel like you haven't, that's on your bucket list of things that you would.
Well, I must say I have worked in some weird places. Like I've worked in Russia and China and Israel and Kuwait and Saudi and London, and I'd quite like to work in Italy somehow. There might be something on the horizon, and I think that'd be rather fun. I sort of feel a bit like I did for the San Francisco show, I think 2 years ago now, I did a sort of one of the vignettes as you come in, and it was La Dolce Vita, and I borrowed somebody's little Vespa, an orange one, and put it by myself. And I hope my family aren't listening because I sort of slightly see myself on an orange Vespa.
Oh, I love that. I mean, you could.
I'll be locked up quite soon.
Yeah, as you're out there doing that project, you could. I am mindful of our time. Any sort of favorite paints or paint colors that you love to use?
I tell you, there's a paint company that I really love at the moment, and it's called Argile, and it's a French paint company, and I saw it, fun enough, at the Royal Academy, and I was being given a walk around the Academy early with the curator or the director, I suppose he was, frankly grand. But anyway, I said to him, look, I love looking at these Van Dycks, and I'm really flattered that you asked me, but I must be really stupid and ask you about the paint, because I'm completely transfixed by the paint. I can practically not look at the horse and the Charles I on the horse. I'm looking at the paint. And he told me what it was, and he was thrilled because he'd fought to get that paint. It's so full of pigment that it drinks your eyes into the wall. And I dragged it out to America. Actually, I think you can get in America now. And I actually was at the house I was in New York, and it's the colors are amazing. And the depth of color and strength in each one is it's just a beautiful paint.
How do it's called
Argile, Argile.
Somebody mentioned to me, and I don't know who this was, and maybe it was you, and I never ever noticed it before, but now I do, that in the US at most museums and galleries the walls are white, but in Europe the walls will be different colors to highlight it could be a dark color, it could be So it's interesting when you were telling that story about that paint color and the Van Dykes that there's that, having that particular paint really drew out the beauty of the paint.
Well, I suppose if you think back when whoever it was had their Van Dyke paint themselves sitting, whatever in their stately home, they wouldn't have had white painted walls. They would have had some rich damask on the wall. And actually it started, David Milinarik, I think, did the National Gallery many years ago now, and everyone was electrified because he put on these wonderful dark green damask walls and red ones and blue ones. And of course, everything looked fantastic. And there had been a moment when proper art consultants told you had to do it on white, I think. And of course, it was quite boring. Well, once you've seen it in colour, of course, you think, how on earth would anyone ever have done it? But it did start. I think he was the first person that did it. And everyone's followed.
Yeah. Well, it does. It's so fascinating. You would think that white would be, but it doesn't always draw out the beauty of the painting as much as it could. Okay, bedding, linens. You could be sheets. We could do any kind of,
I think that I love bed linens, and I think that it started by thinking. I remember growing up thinking all I want is to fall into a bed of Mrs. Porto, Madame Porto. Yes. But actually, if on the practical side, if you can't afford the entire bed, I think the baby pillows are really rather nice to give a sort of colour and a change of feeling. So quite often what I do is white pillows, white bed linen, maybe a coloured border, they're all those lovely stitched borders and then have all sorts of different baby pillows. So every time you have your bed changed, there's another lovely something on the top. And I'd love a baby pillow because you can tuck it in your neck and use it. I'm quite fussy about pillows, actually. I like a square pillow, not hard, but not all that soft, so it sits up properly when you're sitting against it. A very comfortable sleeping pillow, and then your baby pillow. That's how I like to make a bed.
Are there any types of pillows that a brand of pillow that you always purchase for clients, or that you?
There's the sleeping. I think for the ones the baby pillow and the other one, they should be goose down if possible. And I think your pillows are going to last you for a long time.
Yeah.
And I've dragged them back from Germany or Austria, and I cannot remember the name of the make, and they suck out the air so that they come quite little, and you bring them. So you don't have to go onto the airplane looking too idiotic.
But I love your baby pillow tip, because that's what I will do with our they're sort of simple sheets with maybe I'll have a trim or something and a color, and then I love to throw on either two big Porto pillowcases and then a little baby pillow, and mixing up the baby pillow.
Really nice. Because I think the mix on the bed, and somehow those patterns just go, don't they, with everything?
Yeah. Oh yeah, and you can mix them.
You see, you can travel with your baby pillow too.
Yeah.
And especially if you're going somewhere dodgy like mainland China, where you might not have the linens you hope for.
Yeah.
You can take your baby pillow with you and a couple of clean cases.
Yes. And actually, I will so when you buy a pillow, it often comes in those like zip up cases. So I'll put my pillow or my baby pillow in that when I travel, so that it's protected if it has to come out in the security thing. Okay. Tabletop.
I love different tabletop. I think what's fun, especially if I live in quite a small house now, and I have only really two areas where you can sort of eat in, but I've got a long, thin table, which I rather like. And I have masses of things. I've even started something. I had some table placemats, which I think probably in my younger days I would have thought were really naff. I think the word would have been for them. They have crinoline ladies in one corner, and they're all embroidered. And I think you used to have to do them at school when you in 1890 or something. Anyway, I suddenly saw a lot of them somewhere, and I thought, I don't know why. I love these things. So I bought quite a lot. And then with them, I put a plain coloured napkin, linen napkin in quite bright colours. So everybody has a different napkin. And so that's my breakfast. And it amuses me that I've changed from thinking these things were really dreadful to thinking that they were the last word. And then I think it's quite fun to sometimes go for a white tablecloth and do proper silver and crystal. And then another night have, I don't know, I've got a sort of caramel colour. I do the whole thing in tortoiseshell and caramels, and I've got some amber glass. And I just think my cupboard is divided. I've got ambers and green, then I've got blues, then I've got purples and reds, all in the glasses, and then all the. So I'm a bit of a nut, actually. I have got a disease, I think.
I've seen the terrific picture of your dining room, and you have that huge
cupboard.
Yes, behind you, the cabinet. I know it's got such goodies in there. Know it. Okay, what about your favorite places to source antiques, or any flea markets you love to go to, or other places that you would go to for sort of wonderful, unique finds when you're trying to fill out a home?
I think, you know what, I think you can always, I mean, you know, like other people go away for the weekend and they go and play golf or they go and play tennis or something. I go into the town, go antiquing, and you can always come away with something. And actually, you just have to sniff around the antique. I mean, there's a wonderful, Tetbury is a wonderful place in England to find a lot of stuff. But in London, you can go up the Lily Road, there's all sorts of things, and you just go into all the shops walking along. The Guinevere used to be the most amazing shop on the King's Road where I bought so much stuff, and they've reopened now in the harbour. And then there's 2 or 3 times a year, there's the Battersea Antique Show, which is so great because, you know, of course they have some expensive things, but they have a lot of very easy to buy things and wonderful lamps and one stand. And there's one stand which does all those old ice buckets and drinks trolleys, you know, and things like that. I'm doing a little flat in Paris and they want a sort of 50s drinks trolley, which is we found one amazing one. I love the fact that things sort of come back and somebody says to you, I'd really like, sometimes rather in a quiet voice, hoping their other half doesn't hear, do you think we could have a drinks trolley? And then you produce some wonderful brass thing, you know, with that you feel an usherette might push into the room, and it suddenly becomes rather funny and actually very practical.
Very practical. So are you, when you're doing that, because it must take such time to find these unique items, right? I guess you're having those conversations with clients, and then or do you sort of feel like you know if you go to some of these?
Yeah, I pretty much know. And then you see, and then I'll go, I mean, at the weekends, I quite often go antiquing, which is sort of my time.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I bought these blue antique glasses at this store in Connecticut, and one of them broke. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I said, oh gosh, we have, 9 instead of 10 or whatever the number was. And then we were driving from Atlanta back to Nashville because we thought we were going to bring our dogs to Antigua. Anyway, it's a longer story. And we stopped off to charge our car because we had an electric car. And there's an antique store there. And I said, let's go in the store. And I start looking around. It's like a flea market, like one of these huge things that goes on and on. And I found just 2, they just had 2 of the same glasses, the blue glasses I'd gotten in Connecticut, 2 there for sale, like in this. Anyway, so it's fun to find these things. And this is the same glass that we broke, when we moved. And anyway, so it is a fun thing to find these unique things. And then there's a story behind, how you found them and why they're unique to,
There used to be a wonderful woman in Connecticut, right up in Connecticut. And unfortunately, she's shut her shop now. But there was this sort of funny little building, which didn't look very exciting. And I remember being taken there by a client of mine, and then she said, "Oh, do come in." And she opened. I thought I was going to have a heart attack on the spot. She opened this door. It was like a hangar, and there was one whole room of, let's say, green glass and pink glass and green and pink china. The next one was blues. The next one was it. I mean, you practically had a cardiac arrest and got so excited by it, and it changed your view because that she would only have 12. I mean. She wouldn't ever put it out until she had 12, because like China was made, obviously they made 200. So if you are in the marketplace, you know that you can get another tree of life or something and put it together. So that's what she did. And then she said to me once when I needed 24, she said, look, you can mix these 2 patterns. So it changed my complete mental approach to China, because yes, if you're using red, that wonderful sort of red and blue sort of like Oriental China, there's no reason why you can't put 2 different patterns together,
right? And
use it in a different way. So I suddenly thought, yes, of course you can do it what you like, really.
Well, also just to use your table as a way to kind of express your creativity or have a, kind of highlight whatever you're serving or whoever your guests are, there's so much possibility. I can't imagine. I would have too probably need a defibrillator if I walked into a room.
You absolutely would have. That's probably why she's had to shut down.
Yeah.
So many dead bodies.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. Well, Nina, I loved every minute of our conversation. I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. And I can't wait till you come. I missed you in New York when you were there. I'm going up, as I told you, next week, but I hope that our paths cross there or in Nashville or in Antigua or maybe London or some other wonderful place soon.
They have to, because it's just too much fun being with you. So we have to make another plan.
For sure. But thank you so much. It was
thank you for having me.
Thank you so much to the great Nina Campbell for such a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed every minute of my conversation with Nina. I hope that you did too. Her beautiful book, A House in Maine, is available now wherever books are sold, and you can find her beautiful fabrics and wallpaper and her new line with Next on her website at ninacampbell.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate or review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We release another new episode next week. So until next Wednesday, this is Leslie, and thanks so much for listening to Duologue.